Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Michael Berkowitz. I'm the president of 100 Resilient Cities, and we're going to talk a little bit about, with three mayors from 100 Resilient cities, a little bit about the intersection of data and technology and building urban resilience. And what I'll do right now is just bring them out because these three mayors, all big, progressive, innovative cities, really three port cities too, so they have real experience dealing with the intersection of the private and the public sector. But they need no introduction, so let me just bring them out. First, from the city of Rotterdam, Mayor Aboutaleb. Any of the three, Mayor. From Atlanta, Mayor Keisha Lance-Bottoms. Welcome. And from the city of Vancouver, Gregor Robertson. Thanks. Great. So great. And if I'm successful here, we will have an informal kind of conversation where we really get to the bottom of the issues and not speechifying. So let's see if we can do that. Just a little bit of context setting. So when we talk about urban resilience, we're really talking about the ability of a city to survive and thrive in face of disaster, but not just the sudden disasters, the earthquake, hurricane, tornado, terrorism, cyber attack, but also the long-term disasters, long-term food, water, and energy shortage, long-term coastal erosion, or shifting macroeconomic trends. And as I said in the intro, these are three mayors from port cities. If the modalities around transportation, whether that's air transportation or sea transportation, changes, you could see that having really profound impacts on the three cities represented here. All of those, both the shocks, the sudden events, and the stresses, are the subject of what urban resilience is really all about. And how do cities survive and thrive in the face of those disasters? Well, they build capacity. They build a capacity around good infrastructure, about good transportation, about good data, of course. But it's also about community cohesion, where neighbors check on neighbors. It's about the fair and equitable provision of law, justice, and order. It's about long-term strategic planning with good data, with the right stakeholders at the table. All of those capacities help cities survive and thrive in the face of uncertainty and disaster, whatever that is. So it's in that context that we hope to have this conversation about running a city based on, with data-based decision-making and with technology. So let me turn the first question to Mayor Aboutaleb. Mayor, you guys have been climate leaders and well-known climate leaders for a long time, but you're beginning to integrate social programming, and you've been one of the great champions of what you call the we society. Talk about how data and technology plays a role in integrating these two aims of being both climate resilient and building social cohesion and social capacity.
Good morning. We are in Rotterdam very known in the world because of the port. We have the largest port in the Western Hemisphere, even larger than any port in this part of the world, with all these benefits, but also a lot of consequences. So we are polluting the Netherlands for 20%. The amount of CO2 emissions in the Netherlands, 20% is coming from the port of Rotterdam. So we have to handle it. And we consume a lot of energy. The largest refineries in the world are in Rotterdam. And that takes a lot of energy. And we own that port as a city. So if we don't manage to transform the whole cluster in the near future, the city will be the owner of an open-air museum. That's the fact. So we have to deal with that. And we're planning to do a lot of things. If people are interested in that, just turn on our website. You might find a lot of information about how we deal with that transformation. Reuse of water coming from the industry to heat the city. Capture CO2 emissions, clean the CO2, bring it to the farmers to grow crops. So this type of renewing is going on. But the most important thing to me, because a smart city doesn't exist, the only thing that exists are smart citizens. So the question is, can we bring our citizens to a certain level of thinking that we elevate the whole level of social conditions in the city. And then you see that I have a city of different speeds. Downtown has a different speeds than the outskirts. So when I work in the western part of Rotterdam, and I have 3 of my civil servants with me to look on that subject, and it's really, for me, very important to see whether we can use the technology, the knowledge, the wisdom that we have been gathering last 400 years working in the port, whether we can transform that to the social domain using similar data to work with businesses, the owners of buildings, housing corporations, to insulate houses and other energy type, and to work with youngsters in process of co-creation. Do you hear me? 15 variables in one sentence. Mm-hmm. So that is a thing that is rooted in my head. I'm looking for partners, not only in the domain of resiliency, but also the outside. Yeah. I'm born in Morocco, and when you ask people, where is your air in Morocco, nobody says, this is my air. People say, this is my air. Because solutions for a number of issues never lay within the domain you want to solve itself, but in another domain that is next door. Right. So bringing all that together, that's fascinating to me. That's why I'm knocking also on your doors of the 100 resilient cities. Maybe you have knowledge that we can use in this process.
Right. Yeah, and I have to say, I met with your team about a particularly at-risk neighborhood yesterday, and that team, they started the conversation with data, and that was really inspiring to see. And I want to come back and talk a little bit more about that, but maybe Mayor Bottoms, I do want to get to the cyber attack and what keeps you up at night, but talk about, you're a relatively new mayor. What has excited you so far when you think about technology and data in the City of Atlanta context?
Well, good morning. What keeps me up at night are my 4 kids, but as it relates to my job as mayor, certainly the cyber attack was something that quite frankly caught me by surprise. And the reason it did is because over the course of our campaign, I was sworn in on January 2nd of this year. We had probably at least 100 forums, and we had talked about every single thing I thought there was to talk about in terms of challenges facing our city, and cybersecurity was not a topic of conversation. And so while it's something that's ever present and should be a top of mind for us as elected officials, it's not the thing that people see and that our communities are discussing. So the biggest challenge really has been putting it into a context where people understand why it matters to their community. So if we're talking about cybersecurity, my 70-year-old constituent may not understand it unless she can't get information on her water bill, or that 21-year-old who has an outstanding traffic ticket and then can't get to court to pay off the ticket to get his license back. So it really has been putting it in a context where it matters to people, and that way we've been able to elevate it so it's given top consideration for our budget, even coming into this budget season. But as it relates to just the information and the data and the technology, it really has been an opportunity for us to, one, build a city and an infrastructure that we needed all along. Also to elevate the conversation, but really an opportunity for us to break down silos within our organization so that all of our departments are coming together and really mapping out where we are and where we need to go with what our system will look like in the future.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure most people here know, but the cyber attack that we've been referring to happened day 80, if I'm right, in the Bottoms administration. So talk about a massive crisis right out of the gate, and one that brought many city services down, although luckily did not bring down the 9/11 system.
Thankfully, and it was a ransomware attack, and one of the reporters asked during one of our press conferences, what would we do without computer systems? And I joked, but it really was a reality. I said it was an opportunity for our younger employees to practice their penmanship, because we really did have to go back to pen and paper. And for some of our employees, they had never used pen and paper. But it really, again, talking about our resilience as a city, it's been an opportunity for us to build from the ground up because we did not pay the ransomware. And so we really have had to start from scratch in a lot of ways. But we built a system based on communication, not based on security. Right. But welcome to 2018. I think it's something that all cities and entities really need to have top of mind.
Right. Mayor Robertson, you're well known for being ahead of the curve in terms of data and technology. You published a data strategy. You hired a chief data officer. Talk about both how that happened a little bit in your mind. Why did you get religion on this? And how are you thinking about pivoting that to the next generation? I know you're not in office for that much longer, but talk a little bit about what's ahead for Vancouver in terms of data. Yeah,
well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be in New York, and a city I think we all learn from every time we come here. For us, the Open Data Initiative started early in my term, almost a decade ago, and we were one of the early adopters and drivers of open data initiatives and putting data sets public and letting entrepreneurs and people actually apply them, use them for best outcomes. And that's had a whole chain reaction of positive actions, of useful policy decisions that are informed by that data, and investments that are shaped by that data. So it's just kind of like a no-brainer baseline. We need to be public with our data. And that's, I think it's proliferated all around the world.
But was that risky? Was that risky at the time that you did it? Did it feel politically risky in some ways?
No, it didn't feel politically risky at all. It felt like a very logical next step, and basically being able to engage a whole bunch of our citizens that are more data-driven or oriented to actually be able to contribute to the city and build businesses, technology that we could demonstrate at a city scale, and that then could be marketed to other cities using the data. But I would say more broadly speaking, I think what's been really helpful for us, whether it's very granular data, like riding a city bike over here, the pop-up city bike station showed up this morning, and it saved me 5 minutes walking from the nearest city bike station down to this spot. And it wasn't there last night when I checked the app. So that's just a micro example of where real-time granular data is helpful. For us, and on the resilient cities front, we push the pace big time on environment, on climate, on being a 100% renewable city. But for the resilience piece, we've really focused more on the social side and making our community more cohesive, more resilient at a neighborhood level, and collecting data using our utilities data and enabled us to track how many empty homes we had in Vancouver as the real estate market. So a big, huge impact related to affordable housing, foreign capital coming in, and people holding empty houses as investments. Right. The utility data enabled us to identify the magnitude of that. We created an empty homes tax that ran through the last year and ended up being pretty accurate from matching back to the utilities data. But we were able to make the case that there's 10,800 homes that are sitting empty right now and thousands of people who can't find a place to rent. Right. So we connected those dots and brought in an empty homes tax, and which will bring in about $30 million this year, people that are actually paying the tax, willing to hold their empty second or third home. And we know a bunch of property actually shifted over into rental property. So but that came from utility data that we crunched. And whether it's that or even more acute impacts of the opioid overdose crisis, where we're taking data from first responders and matching that to what's happening on the ground, and it's enabling us to, as difficult as it is, to better manage the situation on the streets. Yeah. And that's leading to drug policy reform, that's leading to harm reduction steps. Now 8 overdose prevention sites or supervised injection sites, training in naloxone for everyone that works at the city. But we were able to target it based on where that activity is happening from our first responders data. So it's ubiquitous now. I think for me, it's like how quickly can you connect it to useful outcomes, and as Mayor Bottom said, how do you connect it and make it relevant to people who live in the city?
Yeah. Maybe I'll throw a question open to the three of you. We're in a room full of public and private sector technologists. Talk about, from your perspective, how can tech and cities be better partners? It's not always an easy marriage. What are the things that you guys see from your seats in City Hall that would allow better innovation and better tech to enter cities?
If I might say something about that, I was talking yesterday to the Dutch participants in this conference, and they are good, all of them, and they maybe even excellent in the thing they do. One thing is either solar or parking or mobility, but it's always one thing, and they are excellent in one thing. But a city is not one thing. Yeah. A city is a comprehensive collaboration between a huge number of entities. Yeah. When I was about to develop a small neighborhood with some 800 houses, and the idea is that these houses will deliver electricity, not use electricity, deliver electricity. We would like to have another system of storing electricity, not longer batteries, but other system of storing electricity. That such a neighborhood can be standalone in terms of energy consumption, right, delivering electricity to the public lighting. And that the public lighting will be also useful to have a small camera for civilians in the neighborhood, which is inactive until something happens in such a neighborhood. And what about water? That rainwater is not only good to grow grass, but also to use it for drinking water. So you have a good drinking water to filter it to the level of drinking water. And the remaining water for maybe 90% will be good enough to enter the land and not going to be guided to the sewage. Right. So we'll have another system of sewage system in the city. Again, 10, 12 variables. We need 12 technology providers, and they have to learn together to provide a city, not a technology, but to provide a solution. And that's where city designers, developers, and technology providers need each other to work concepts of developing a city. And that's really the future. If we're not succeeding in doing that, city politicians are not always the smartest people when it comes to developing these technologies. They are good in steering a city, but not in applying technology. Then we need support from the market. So a kind of collaboration, a co-creation process between the industries, the providers of technologies, and the civil servants at our side who are working on shaping the city. Yeah. That's where we need, I think, a constant collaboration.
Yeah. And in my head, when I hear you, I'm wondering how the city needs to change in order to also meet the technologists where they want to. I want to.
So again, for me, it really is about making sure that we are meeting and enhancing our communities at their point of need. So we have a segment in Atlanta that may have access to smart technology and smartphones and the whole nine, but there's still a huge portion in Atlanta, especially when you talk about income disparity in Atlanta, where there are people who don't have access to basic technology. And so they may still have a landline, and it may be using technology so that information is getting into their landline and they can press a button and access information. Or it may be even as simple as providing a community or broadband network within their respective communities, which is still a challenge in the city of Atlanta and many communities. So I really think it would be most helpful to have a true assessment on where we are as a city and exactly where we can go from our respective communities. It will not be, there won't be a one-size-fits-all model.
Yeah. Yeah, Robertson?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think cities need to be enabling and basically creating platforms and ways that entrepreneurs and technologists can contribute in different ways. I think open data sets are a no-brainer. That's a starting point to make sure every possible piece of public data that should be public is public and is in usable formats. So That's a basic piece. We created a thing called the Green and Digital Demonstration Program, which has enabled dozens of local companies to demonstrate their technology. We focused it on green and digital arenas, and we've had dozens of them come forward with proposals, projects. They've demonstrated their tech and then being able to market it to other cities based on what they've proven at our scale. So that's enabled entrepreneurs and startups to plug into the city system. Usually our procurement, public procurement is very rigorous, and it excludes a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, and particularly on the tech side. Yep. So trying to create those channels and opportunities. We have another program that we started, basically getting students from all of our post-secondaries, all of our universities and colleges that spend a semester working at the city, mentored by city staff. It's basically like a mini department at the city called City Studio, and they are basically like a skunk works for the city. They come up with ideas, policy, technology that they can roll out and make happen at the city level. We do big forums called Hubbub at City Hall, where they showcase their forums to city staff, and it's been thousands and thousands of students have now come through this program in the last half dozen years. It's been very popular, and lots of them have ended up working at the city. Lots of them are working in the space of urban tech or civic tech or whatever it is. So it's I think those pathways are really critical to enable people to access the big city and contribute in some way, and hopefully some of those have the opportunity to scale.
Yeah. We run an annual convening where we bring tech, VC, and cities together. The next one is coming in May, and Mayor Bottoms will join us for that. And one thing we found is that, to your point about procurement, the startups are they're too small and their timescales are too short to really participate in procurement. But venture capital actually is a good avenue because they can sometimes provide the route through which the startups access the city, build those relationships. They're there for the long term in a way that the startups may not always be. Mm-hmm. Maybe maybe a very quick answer. What scares you? I mean, we haven't talked about tech. Is there anything that scares you about these kind of interactions as a mayor? Two mayors who have longevity, one mayor who I hope has longevity. What are the things that scare you about tech?
Well, the issue is my way of working is a co-creation always with citizens. So go into neighborhoods, knocking on the doors of citizens and saying the mayor is here in the neighborhood tonight. We're going to eat something, and then start debating what is needed to be changed. My fear is that a lot of citizens, when it comes to such subjects, think it's too far from my business. It's not sexy enough to be debated in politics. It's not always sexy enough to be attractive for citizens to be involved. So the answer can be, well, you are there, we elected you, we trust you, you have the budget, fix it, don't bother me. Yeah. While we need the citizens really to create volume. So and the fear is that we need a lot of energy to keep our citizens motivated.
My biggest concern is that as we grow as a city and we really get smarter as a city with technology, that we are inadvertently creating an even larger divide with many of our underserved communities because we're leaving so many communities behind. I had a college professor who used to say when we were writing, if Joe on the back of the Coca-Cola truck can't understand it, it's too complicated. And in many ways, I view that as a challenge we have with technology, that sometimes it's so complicated that we are assuming that people have a very base level understanding of technology when actually they don't, and that we are creating an even larger divide. So while we are addressing one issue, we are exasperating another.
Right. Mayor Robertson?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, obviously, social equity and climate change, we've got big things that are scary and in our time horizons are daunting to grapple with. But I would say, on the innovation front, a big challenge that we face is technology, say AVs, automated vehicle technology. there's billions and billions of dollars going into the tech,
Right.
and there's almost nothing going into the public policy development. And it's going to have colossal impacts, some positive, some negative, depending on the public policy we develop. And cities, right now, we don't have our own staff to do the R&D and public policy development.
Yep.
We're mostly frontline staff. So shaping that public policy so that new technology is actually net positive, and we gain the real estate that parked cars are using right now. We figure out how to transition the workforce out of driving and into other ways to contribute to the city. I mean, we have big challenges with that, and what scares me is I don't see a lot of work and development of the best public policy outcomes and in ways that we can align in cities so we're not kind of picked off one by one, and different impacts affect different cities because there isn't cohesion with the policy.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's absolutely right. And we talk a lot about the benefits of the AVs, but it's, you think single occupancy vehicles are bad, wait till you have zero occupancy vehicles driving around your city. That's going to be even worse. So we're out of time. 3 amazing and sophisticated cities with 3 amazing mayors. We at 100 Resilient Cities think that how cities use data and technology is really important. We're actually going to run what we call a collab, where we pick one of the 100, do a convening, and really bring in partners so that they can begin to flesh out in a real and concrete way some of the issues cities are facing. We'll do that later this year, maybe with one of the sophisticated cities like the 3 here, maybe with a city that's slightly less sophisticated, but we think it's an absolutely essential issue. Please join me in thanking the 3 mayors for their contributions this morning.